Crime Chief Leslie James, under cross-examination at the ongoing Walter Rodney Commission of Inquiry, was further pressed on the steps taken, or the lack thereof, by the Guyana Police Force to effectively investigate the circumstances surrounding Dr. Walter Rodney's death. Chairman of the Commission, Sir Richard Cheltenham, highlighted the extraordinary series of omissions in the investigations by the Guyana Defense and police forces.
Does it not raise the question of whether this is, look, human as we are, every now and again, people that with the most experience may be guilty of omissions in the discharge of their public obligations, professional obligations. But given the frequency, the importance of the omissions, it raises reasonable question about whether it was not deliberate.
From what we've seen, that there were a number of omissions, but with regard to whether or not it was deliberate, I cannot offer an opinion, sir.
You don't want to offer any opinion on that?
Not that I don't want to offer an opinion, but for me to offer an opinion to see whether it was deliberate, I think based on what I've read and based on the files, they appears not to be sufficient for me to say that there were some deliberateness, please, sir.
You would prefer to say that it cannot be ruled out?
Well, perhaps, yes, reasonably, that can be ruled out, sir.
During cross-examination by attorney Christopher Ram, who represents the interest of the Working People's Alliance, the crime chief told the commission he was unable to make any conclusion regarding Dr. Rodney's death and whether there was any conspiracy to commit murder.
What conclusion has been entered on the files?
I'm unable to say. I think this commission is also seeking to ascertain certain things based on its TOR.
But the commission has a very different function from the police in terms your job, both you personally and the institution you represent, have a statutory duty.
That is true.
So it's very different from this commission. So I'm asking you what conclusions you have recorded, if any, on the file.
Files of the GPA.
Yes.
It is my conclusion that the investigation into the death of Walter Rodney is closer.
But he didn't ask you that. He asked you what conclusions recorded on the file. But are any conclusions recorded on the file? That's the first thing.
I'm not aware that there is a conclusion. Had there been, I don't think they would have had this commission in its first place.
But having reviewed the file, what conclusion would you come to? That's
I haven't had a conclusion, please, sir.
But if you're invited to make one, what would it be?
So I'm unable to make a proper conclusion, sir.
Even you don't feel in your capacity as crime chief, you have a duty to do so?
Of course, it's part of my duty, but I'm saying I'm unable to do so, sir.
And if I may, the second limb of the question, the second question, is did you pursue or did you see any evidence that a conspiracy to commit murder was part of the scope of this investigation into Dr. Rodney's death?
Would it be helpful to identify the parties to the conspiracy?
This commission has certainly identified a number of leads. I don't think I'm in a position to identify parties, but certainly a number of leads that might have been considered as potential targets in an investigation of conspiracy. So my question is whether that line of investigation was pursued.
I'm unaware, sir. I'm not in a position to say whether or not that line was pursued or not, sir.
On this crime, Chief, you don't think you ought to do that,
Or to do what,
to
sir?
pursue that line, since the file is not officially closed?
I don't think that question is a fair question.
You can answer yes or no.
Mr.
I
Rama,
don't doubt you, but it's not a fair question.
I'm not sure to what premises we are pursuing. Now, my note resulting from what the witness said is that the investigation is closed. So you are still proceeding on the premise that assuming it is not closed.
Thank you, sir.
But the reality is that it's closed.
He said from the evidence in the CID files, it appears as though ownership of the alleged Guyana Defense Force Islander aircraft that took murder-accused Sergeant Gregory Smith to Kokwani was the only issue pursued by the GDF.
It is reported that police obtained information that Gregory Smith may have been taken to Kwakwani in an airplane allegedly owned by GDF, but that the GDF was unable to ascertain the ownership of the aircraft. From your review of the files, could you tell this commission whether ownership was the only interest of the police in these investigations?
Sir, are you pointing me to a specific paragraph on this page, sir?
Yes, I think that they obtained information that Smith may have been in the Kwakwani area. He may have also been taken there via an airplane allegedly owned by the GDF, but on the file there appears to be no confirmation on whether or not that airplane was in fact owned by the GDF or whether it was not.
And your question is, please, sir?
Whether ownership was the only issue from your reading of the file, whether ownership of the aircraft was the only issue pursued by the police in their investigations.
Do you mean as it relates to the GDF's involvement,
Yes, ma'am.
or
Yes.
more generally?
Well, in terms of what is stated here, I'm asking the question arising out of this.
You mean the only issue in the entire investigation was whether or
In
not...
relation to the GDF.
Oh, I see.
It appears so, sir. That is at the last paragraph.
Thank you. From your review of the file, did the police investigation establish that it was the GDF that took Mr. Gregory Smith to Kwakwani?
I don't think so, sir.
Could you please elaborate and tell us what you think?
If I can refer counsel to the said paragraph that you pointed me to, it states here, and that is referring to Mr. Smith, he may have been taken there via an airplane allegedly owned by the GDF, but on file there appears to be no confirmation on whether or not that airplane was in fact owned by the GDF or whether it was.
Now, would it not be the function of an investigation to explore that possibility to certainty? I.e., to establish whether it was the GDF that in fact did take him there, rather than may have taken him there.
In a normal course of things, it should have been.
But did the investigation so establish that the GDF actually took him there from the police files?
It doesn't appear so, sir.
It was purported by several eyewitnesses that Gregory Smith arrived at Kokwani the day after Rodney's murder, June 14, 1980, in a GDF Islander aircraft 8RGER. He is alleged to have met with his father, Cecil Smith, who lived in Kokwani, and then he subsequently crossed over to neighboring Suriname. The crime chief told the commission that he is unsure if there was sufficient information prior to Rodney's death on Gregory Smith to place him under the radar. James is aware of attempts to have Smith tried for murder in absentia since a warrant for his arrest was issued in the mid-90s. The crime chief was also pressed on evidence taken from the transcript of the 1988 inquest into Dr. Rodney's death.
Without knowing for a fact, could you rule out that Smith might have been a source? You reviewed the file, you brought your inquisitive mind, your investigative mind, your years of experience. Could you rule out that Smith might have been a source of information to the police? For the police?
I don't think that can be directly ruled out, please, sir.
Pardon?
I don't think that aspect can be directly ruled out, as you inquired.
Okay, that's great.
That takes me to a question I wanted to ask. These documents in the WPA police files, the various reports on surveillance activities, they do not set out for the person outside of the police force to be able to know who the informants were. The source of information is not there.
That is so correct, please, ma'am.
And that is a decision taken in terms of secret surveillance operations.
That's right.
But the
all
police
all
would know.
operatives are sworn to the Secrecy Act.
And therefore, and they're not exposed by their names being appended to
No,
the
please, ma'am.
reports made. But there would be another record somewhere which would indicate the source of the information.
That aspect I cannot address.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily true.
That is your answer, not necessarily so.
I'm not sure, please.
How would the police be able to, for example, to check back on the authenticity of the reports a week or two later? How would they trace where these reports come from?
As part of the procedure of the department, there's a system where reports would be graded before they're actually determined whether or not they're good, excellent, bad, should not be worked on, should not be looked at, etc.
And also, in order to secure the secrecy and confidentiality of the reports, the details in relation to surveillance activities would not necessarily be recorded. The actual mechanics of the surveillance.
That's also correct.
Because we heard from the widow of Dr. Walter Rodney, we heard from Dr. Pat Rodney that there were regular surveillance operations outside of her house. But that does not form part of any of the reports here. But it could be carried out without being recorded here, according to the methodology used.
Quite true.
Which you have told us of. Thank you. I had wanted to inquire as to that.
Is there a thing called official informants? That is that they are all recognized by a few people or the crime chief, maybe his deputy and so on. And then there are top investigators who have their own informants that are not known as official informants.
Informal and informal, please, sir.
So,
Informal and formal, please.
He was asked by Attorney Ram if any information contradicting the report that Smith, 12 days prior to Rodney's death, was arrested for pulling a firearm on the deputy headmaster of the Ramakrishna School, Harry Prasad.
Is it a reasonable inference, sir, that both the police and the army, acting through the Joint Intelligence Committee, would have known of Mr. Smith's prospective role in the death of Rodney?
It may have been so, sir.
It may.
Have been so.
Thank you, sir.
the expression there was prospective rule.
Sorry, sir?
You said both the police and the army should have known, and I think the answer was may have.
Of its prospective role, because we are looking here at particularly a document dated April 1980. This document was in the possession of the police. It mentions some serious security issues.
And my answer is based on that aspect, which begins with the persons.
Thank you, sir.
I think the further question then might have been why was there not a preemptive strike and arrested him? I think that follows from the logic of the response
sir.
given to your question.
Is it your view that in those circumstances, with that information that was available, that Dr. Rodney ought to have been arrested?
Dr. Rodney,
Sorry,
Dr. Gregory Smith.
and Dr. Rodney, this was April 1980 at that time, and subsequently Gregory Smith. So there are two questions.
That statement speaks specific to Smith.
Yes.
But do I take it that you're now including?
Well, let's deal with Smith first, please, sir.
Yes.
So, should he have been arrested on the basis of the information that was available?
It appears so. Based on the statement made by Mr. McCrae. Because he's saying all of the persons who were looking for Smith had all the particulars of him and other witnesses.
And just for the record, sir, is it correct to say that Donald Rodney was charged even before the police interviewed him? And
He was charged
again,
before
I'm
you-
ARG4.
I'm not sure what that's all.
The crime chief said the fact that Gregory Smith may have been acting as an agent for the security forces and was given instruction with regards to Rodney's death cannot be ruled out. He said, too, that there is no evidence to suggest that this was an area of focus by the police force. The Commission's chairman questioned, given all that has been revealed at the Commission of Inquiry, that challenged the professional integrity of the GDF and police force if any step has been taken to revisit their actions.
That speaks to the involvement of the Defence Force aircraft in getting them out to Quick Valley.
Bear in mind, it's a restricted area. Timeri was restricted.
And he took him from Timeri,
Restricted area.
restricted area, and got him there. So he's pointing to the involvement of high men. I mean, it's just a walk in there, so it's just involved in the death of a man. You walk into a restricted area, government plane, Defence Force plane, I mean. But let me ask you a further question, and you can answer all one time. Has the Defence Force thought that it had an obligation, and the police now, even 34 years after, given all that is now coming out, to revisit their files and their own actions and ask themselves, did we act professionally and properly in all of this? Given all that has come up now, could we just go ahead now as though nothing has happened? There's evidence now that challenges our professional integrity and our thoroughness. Ought we not to have a conference among ourselves, several discussions, where did we go wrong? Where were we less than careful? Where did we lame our own professional integrity? How did it happen? Is all of that a matter of concern to you and your fellow senior officers?
Quite frankly, I think there should be some engagement of the mind in that regard.
Somebody has to initiate it and say, look,
But,
this thing doesn't look good. Come on, man, we have to get together and ask where we went wrong. How did it happen?
that call would be made by my superiors.
Somebody got to suggest something sometimes. Sometimes a low man suggests something to a high man, you know.
Yeah, but in terms of the decision, it has
Perhaps
to be
the
made
time
by...
has not yet come because we are not yet finished.
Yes, sir.
But given all that is on record to date, seems to me that this should be a live matter of discussion among those of you who are now there in positions of leadership. How did it happen? Where did we go wrong? Just my own humble suggestion at this stage. Tentative 1, 2.
Mr. James, I have two final questions for you. Do the weaknesses or the failures in the investigation rule out a conspiracy by the state apparatus with Gregory Smith as an instrument to kill Dr. Rodney?
I think I've answered that question too, but not in the way in which you put it. But in terms of conspiracy, I'm not sure whether there was a conspiracy, but as I said, the investigation appears to be short of being thorough, sir.
On the re-examination by the Assistant Lead Counsel to the Commission, Lashmi Muhammad, James was asked if the police failed to follow up on leads that were literally in their bosoms.
This statement was perused earlier in your cross-examination. You accept that what is recorded in this statement is that a person by the name of Gregory Smith was introduced by one Cecil Smith, who was his father, to Mr. Van Kooten.
Correct?
That was borne through a little earlier.
That's correct.
Now, at that point in time, the statement indicated that this was actually during June the 14th, shortly after the 14th of June 1980. Isn't that so?
That's true.
That he was standing where he heard a male saying that when he used to live in that place, he never had all this mud to walk through. And that person was in fact Gregory Smith.
From all appearances, yes.
Good. Now, this puts Gregory Smith at Kakwani shortly after the 14th of June 1980. Isn't that so?
Shortly
After the 14th of June 1980.
yes.
Good. Now, according to this statement, Cecil Smith, shortly after the 14th of June 1980, introduced this Gregory Smith to Robert Van Kooten. Isn't that so?
Correct. There was an introduction, yes.
And this same Cecil Smith, father of Gregory Smith, introduced his son to Van Kooten as a sergeant in the army. Isn't that so?
That's right.
And it is recorded there in that statement. Now, could you go down to the certificate attached to this statement and indicate to us who wrote this statement or took this statement from Mr. Van Kooten?
The statement was taken by Sergeant Sago.
And what date and at what time?
It was taken on Monday, 14 July 1980 at 2:15 p.m.
At 2:15 p.m. Now, I wish to direct you to another statement in the same WR1 given by Cecil Smith, and that is page 56.
Cecil Smith?
Cecil Smith, C-E-C-I-L.
Some people pronounce it Cecil. The two previous statements, I think for the benefit of the public, the first one was a supernumerary constable, and Robert Van Kooten says corporal.
Attached to the mining, Guyana Mining Enterprise.
And Joe Southwell.
Supernumerary constable.
Attached to the Guyana Mining Enterprise Limited.
Now, Mr. James, would you care at this point in time to just read this statement into the record for us?
Cecil Smith, age 62 years, states, years of mixed race, states, I am a retired Guyana Mining Enterprise employee, and I reside at the above named address with my wife, children, and grandchildren. I am the father of 5 children, the eldest being a girl. My second child is one Gregory Smith, who is a member of the Guyana Defense Force. He has a son with my first wife, one Annie Smith, who lives myself separated sometime in the early 50s. So I left her along with my children in Georgetown and came to work at Kokwani and in the Berbice River area. A few years ago,
I'm sorry, officer, it says he has a son with my first wife, but I think it really means he is the son. He's the son of my first wife.
That's why I paused the video.
Yes.
Hope you're right, man.
Continue, Mr. James.
A few years ago, I was in the city and I met Gregory by St. Andrew's Church, and he told me that he wanted to join the army. I told him that it was up to him if he so desires. About 2 or 3 years ago, I received a letter from Gregory, my son from England. He told me he was in the United Kingdom and that he is doing fine, and I inquired if he was well. He did not mention anything whether he was attending a course, and from since then, I have not received a word or hear anything from Gregory. On Saturday, 14 June 1980, I was not at home. I went down the Berbice River at a place called Juliana to repair an engine. My reputed wife, Lillian, went to Ichuni. My son, Edward Smith, alone was at home at the present moment. He is in Georgetown. I cannot say where he is stopping, nor when he will come back. After the Rodney bombing incident, I was in New Amsterdam, and there were rumors that the police were looking for one Gregory Smith, and people were asking me if the said person is my son. I told them I have a son by that name, but I cannot say if it was him. On Thursday, 17 July, I was shown a photograph of a soldier in uniform. The person looked like my son from his features, but I am not sure if it's him. I was also shown a photograph of a female person of which I cannot identify, or I have never seen her before. My son, Gregory Smith, was born in Georgetown Hospital and not at Kokwani. He was born sometime between 1943 and 1944, sometime around May, June. I cannot remember the exact date. At no time at all my son Gregory Smith was at Kokwani when I returned home. Edward did not tell me anything. Signed by Cecil Smith and certified by Sergeant Sego.
Certified by Sergeant Sego.
Yes, ma'am.
And just for the purposes of the record, what date was this statement taken?
It was taken on the 17th of July 1980, ma'am.
Now, if you look at Van Kooten's statement and you compare what Van Kooten said on the 14th of July, 1980, with what Cecil Smith is saying on the 17th of July, 1980. Remember, Sego is the same policeman taking both statements. before he spoke to Cecil Smith and took this statement, he would have already had Van Kooten's statement, isn't that so? Given the dates they were taken.
Page 58.
Yes, sure. Yes, ma'am.
Now, as a good police investigator, shouldn't Mr. Sago have confronted Cecil Smith, who is saying, at no time at all, my son Gregory Smith was at Kakwani when I returned home?
Possibly, yes.
Mr. Ahmed gave a synopsis of the day's proceedings.
We saw the public cross-examination of Mr. James being completed today. It should be noted that there were some issues which arose during his cross-examination that will require an in-camera hearing. What that means is whatever has to be said by Mr. James in relation to those issues touch and concern matters of national security and therefore will not be done in the public domain, but the hearing will be held excluding the public so that the members of the commission can hear what Mr. James has to say on these sensitive matters. Other than that, we have the completion of his cross-examination in the public hearings. Once again, on today's date, the inquests and the records from the inquests were gone through, in addition to certain aspects of the police files and also the special branch files, which shows that surveillance was being conducted on Dr. Rodney and also associates of Dr. Rodney. What is evident and what is a thread throughout all of Mr. James's testimony is that there has been a number of deficiencies in the police investigations since 1980. You have the fact that Gregory Smith was known to the police. You have the fact that Gregory Smith, although they knew him, there was a report on the 1st of June 1980, and this is evident from the inquest report, where Gregory Smith was arrested in relation to threatening someone with a firearm. Mr. James was asked questions in relation to how this type of report would have been handled in today's if the police received such a report, and he accepted that if somebody is a firearm holder and they threaten someone with it, it would be normal for the police to take possession of the firearm while they investigate that matter. Dr. Walter Rodney, who was in fact killed as a result of the incident of the 13th of June 1980, he did in fact have on his lap a device which had explosives in it. You have evidence coming from Gwendolyn Jones and Ignatius McCrae and even Vernon Gentle that equipment, electrical equipment, was removed from the home of Gwendolyn Jones. You have facts that are known that Gregory Smith was indeed, qualified electrician. He was a member of the GDF. He is a man that was known to the police, yet he was not picked up, and in fact he was indeed assisted by the GDF and taken to Kakwani and then removed from Kakwani, but we do not know where he went when he left Kakwani on the 17th of June 1980. We also have, for the first time, the statement of Gregory Smith's father, Cecil Smith, that was read out in the proceedings today. Now, Cecil Smith says that his son was born mid-June, either in the year 1943 or 44. But then you have in the book Assassination Cry of a Failed Revolution photocopies of a birth certificate issued in the name Cyril Johnson. But the picture attached to that passport and the birth certificate details speak of a Cyril Johnson and not a Gregory Smith. What this indicates is there is a disparity. there is a need for explanation in relation to how these official documents issued from the relevant authority was able to be obtained by the same man in two different names. And in essence, the cross-examination revealed that these things could not have happened without the relevant authorities and the issuing body sanctioning these particular official documents being issued to Gregory Smith in the name of Cyril Johnson. While the crime chief did not rule out the fact that the investigations, the tantamount of all the omissions, could have been deliberate, he could not rule out that it was part and parcel of a conspiracy to kill Walter Rodney on behalf of the state. But at the same time, he did not outright affirm that he did see a conspiracy. But there are so many omissions that even he himself is not able to rule out the possibility of such a conspiracy being in existence. I think all in all, Mr. James's evidence is going to be very substantial when it comes to the commissioners writing their report. At the end of the day, it is for them to draw the conclusions that some of the council tried to get Mr. James to make. However, all Mr. James could have done was go through the files, go through the documents that he presented, and then form his own opinions based on his experience as an investigator and now sitting at the top spot, which is head of the CID.